Hello everyone. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. For since the very beginning, when I had first purchased the rundown, antiquated farmhouse on the outskirts of town, there had been a sense of tension which hung over me. The house itself was an antique, a thing of yesteryears, whose wood had groaned and twisted in decades, whose paint had chipped and faded to gray. I had purchased the house cheaply, hoping for seclusion and praying seclusion would be magic to the life of literature. I never knew isolation is more terrible than anarchy. There had been a shed in the garden. It stood alone in front of the building, half buried in the ground like a ship which had run onto the shore and stuck to a decaying pier. I hadn't seen it until something within me shivered. It was not the dented appearance which startled me, but that the door had been padlocked on the outside, as if something within had to be locked in instead of out. My amazement was serious. National stillness was stifling, somehow reassuring. I wrote more seriously, generating chapters more quickly ever in the city. Then later, although after a few nights, stillness was smothering. I started tuning into things, way out at first. Scratchings along floorboards, always way off, never close. Thuds on the windows at midnight. I tried to tell him. Old houses creak, wind moans, branches rub. But my own fear crept up on me slowly, like rot spreading under the planks. It was during the third week that I first started to believe that someone was following me. I would be sitting in front of my desk working on a project or typing, and I would have this feeling on the back of my neck that someone was staring at me, and it was something that I couldn't even see, just standing directly behind me. And if I would turn around to look to see if there's something there, nothing ever would be. But the sensation would never abate. It grew stronger when I'd pass by in front of the shed. Something about it just irritated me intensely, nagged at my mind. I did not sleep that evening. I went outside into the yard. The fog was so dense you could cut it with a knife, and the moon was attempting to penetrate. I was staring at the shed once more. The chains creaked quietly in the wind, but I would have paid cash money that something was crawling across the slats of wood, a shadow where there should not be. I stiffened as stone. My breath stuck in my throat, and it was gone. I huddled back under the covers, shivering, convincing myself I was nuts. Lack of sleep, perhaps, or the crazy brain of a solitary specter. But the nightmares started that night. Nightmares about a man in the shed, as dead as the dead. Blank pit eyes shining through the slats of wood. In the nightmares, he would whisper my name. Not shout it, not scream it, but whisper it. So quietly, so softly, that I would shiver. I would wake up drenched in clammy sweat, heartbeat racing, the whisper still echoing in my head. I quit writing. The weeks went by, and the solitude that I had yearned for so long became a cell. I began to hear the whisper even when I was awake. It was a faint one in walls or in room corners, never taking form. It started and finished like the wind, but it was with a purpose. I awoke one morning, and on my window there were footprints. Human, barefoot. The ground the night before was rain-soaked, and the footprints were brand new. They began at the shed and ran to my window, and then they just ended, like the human had hung around that area for a time and then just dissolved into the ground. I ought to have acted then. But fear does to the brain some horrible things. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you doubt if your going is to give belief to the insanity. I gave belief that I'd dreamed it all, that I'd slept the entire night outside. I gave belief to whatever would hold me, belief to the insane. So I stayed. Last week was a foretaste of something to which I am not yet accustomed. I would see the man, not complete, but in fragments. A reflection in the mirror in front of me. A shadow at night against the window glass. A profile on the edge of my line of sight that vanished when I pushed him away. He had worn, tattered clothes, and his face. His face did not exist. It was not possible, something the mind could never provide. But the eyes, always. Black, empty, wooden, eyes without the glint of life, but vacuum tubes draining it from me. He never rushed. He never came in contact with a human. He just lingered, always in front of where he had been. I slept no more. I boarded up the windows. I nailed down all the doors, all the drawers. I left a light on in each room, but it didn't do any good. Where I was, he was too. The whisper rose to low growl, revving grind in the back of my head. And one night, the whisper boiled over. It wasn't my name again. It spoke. You opened it. I hadn't. Here, in this world. But in sleep I did. I had entered the shed. I had removed the chains. I had left the door wide open and inside done nothing whatsoever except darkness, and the man, waiting. And I recalled stepping back, trying to shut the door but too late. He had rolled over already. I had annoyed myself at clanking chains on the floor. I ran to the rear window. The shed door was open, chains littering the lawn in messy heaps like two shed snakes wrapped up. I descended. There wasn't anyone else who had a key to unlock it. I was the sole individual who had keys. They were all right, they were unlocked. I didn't venture out. I no longer believed in safety beyond my doors. I locked myself in the bathroom and remained there until morning, though morning was no longer peaceful. Morning brought the shed door still ajar. I set out to prowl the grounds to determine if I could find anything. The house, as it turned out, had never once been listed for sale on the market for over 2 decades. It belonged to a farmer named Henry Carr, an isolated farmer who had vanished in the middle of winter with nothing whatsoever. They explained how he would have lost his mind, proving there was somebody in his shed, somebody whom he alone could see. He had shut the shed and never entered it again. They said he was found muttering, bloodshot eyes, sobbing hysterically over the man who watches. And after that, he simply disappeared one day. Nobody went to the trouble. They figured he simply wandered into the woods and died. But that shed never was opened until I came. I tried to get out the next morning. I had filled the car with supplies, packed the back seat as tight as possible, and taken out the gun. But the highway was further off than it had ever been. I'd been driving an hour straight, and still hadn't caught so much as a suggestion of change. Trees along the side of the road offered themselves, branch by branch leaning out on top like on a birdcage. My GPS hadn't functioned. My phone battery had died. I coasted onto the side and got reoriented and found myself not on a highway at all, but home again in the driveway, as if I'd never left in the first place. I lost it. I yelled at the vacuum. I slapped my hand on the dashboard. I wept. But the house remained, stupid and immovable, and the shed still open, standing behind it like an open sore. And the man ceased playing hide and seek. He began to appear visible in full view within. I went into a room and he was in the corner, stiff, motionless. I blinked and he disappeared. But behind him remained the traces that lingered. Water-spilled floor wood, wall smudges, the sneakily creaking scrape which was a sign of a squeak of the door behind. I paid attention then. He wasn't just here. He was shaping. I never invited him into the fabric of my ordinary life, inserting himself into all that I did. I began to lay it all out, on paper with each episode, recording my disintegration. I wished it to be spoken, I think, in a bid to welcome, to understand. I didn't wish to construct it any longer. I slept in the attic tonight, my last refuge. I'd blocked the chairs, boarded over the windows to the door. I'd covered round the corner, pen in hand, and waited. He moved through the house stealthily, but I caught him. I felt the stillness, the world holding its breath as one as he approached. I felt the weight of his body, the cold, the binding of my chest. And in front of the attic door, he did not knock. He did not say anything. He simply stood there, waiting for hours, and then the creaking of opening the door. It could not have, it had been hammered shut, bolted, fitted, but it creaked open anyway. Slowly, persistently. I never heard him come. I don't know if he did or not, but I felt him, closer than ever before. I closed my eyes and muttered a prayer that I didn't think. And then empty silence. I woke at dawn, still breathing. The attic was empty. The house was the same. The shed door hung shut again, chains around its handles. But something in me had changed. I left there, and the highway never returned. I drove for hours as the house faded behind me out on the horizon. I crossed states, assumed new names, attempted to recall. But the man stays. He never leaves. I catch him looking sometimes, in mirrors, in his sleep, out of the corner of my eye if I turn too quickly. He stands firm, always waiting. And one day he will not wait. One day he will require no shadows. One day I will wake, and he will be there. And this time, he will not leave. It was winter 2017. 2 days back, it had snowed mountains, silencing everything. My parents had taken leave early morning for a weekend visit to the mountains, something they'd fantasized about after years of constant toil. I had stayed behind, a 22-year-old college-going girl on winter holidays at our rural suburb home on the border of the woods. The house had been so empty without them. Without the noise of my parents or TV chatter from the sitting room, it was quiet. Too quiet. I had appreciated the quiet to begin with, slowly reintroducing reading and finishing thesis at the last minute. The quiet felt claustrophobic by night too, though. We strolled along the length of a blocks-long dead-end cul-de-sac, whose two sides were lines of black ribcage woods that went on forever. It was the sort of place you'd call still until you were standing there by yourself. Then any creak of wood, any susurration of air through leaves would sound like something else. That evening, a Saturday evening after the sun fell below the horizon line and gunmetal gray crept up the sky, supper was cooked and 2 lamps turned on so the house wouldn't creak so loudly. The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator whined a metallic whine. I attempted to convince myself that it didn't feel out of the ordinary, that the lack of air in my chest was simply because I was alone. It was around 9:30 when it happened. I had been cozied up in my second-floor flat reading in a pool of lamplight when I heard something. A passing one, as if I'd said it. It was a knock. Not on the front door, but on one of the windows. A slow, deliberate one. 3 hard raps. I remained bricked in place. We did have some ground-floor windows in our house, but they were facing the edge of the forest and backyard. Wind on a shutter or branch was my first guess. But we never did install shutters, and there was at least a 10-foot distance between the home and the next tree. I rose, the heart pounding that single special beat only when such a time comes when the body knows before the mind that something is amiss. I went quietly down and knelt at the landing, the ears strained. Silence. I went down the stairs slowly, not wanting to make it creak on every step too bad. I looked through the peephole in the front door. Nothing. I even went around back out onto the porch. The just-fallen white outside was immaculate. No prints anywhere. No movement. But still, I still felt like someone was hiding and watching me. I moved from room to room, verifying the locks, the windows, the back door. All was well. I convinced myself it was my imagination or the heater pushing air through the pipes. There was something, though, within me that remained, an otherworldly unease, as if a breath had been exhaled too long in the dark. At 11:47 p.m., it happened again. Another rap on the back window. I sprang to it and shoved the curtain aside. Nothing. Silkenness of snow yard moonlightedly dimmed. Something was different. There were tracks this time. They started behind the clump of trees over to the window, deep, unashamed tracks in the snow, and they didn't vanish. They ended under the window. I shoveled the yard, attempting to find the outline of something disappearing into the blackness, but otherwise the snow was uninterrupted over the yard except in those tracks. I backed away from the window, slowly, a thrill of adrenaline running through me, the atavistic portion of my mind screaming that I no longer possessed anything of my own. I barricaded myself in the living room and called the police. I told them that someone had come to my house, tapped on the window, and disappeared. They said if I notice anything else I should call them, and that a patrol unit would be driving by shortly and remain indoors and have the phone within reach. They informed me that they contacted everybody with some kind of subdued air of doubt. Maybe they assumed I was some middle-aged, goofy kid who'd been up late nights watching teen horror films. The police never found out anything. No breaking and entering, no cars. Nothing. They explained to me the snow arrived too suddenly on the tracks and that it must have been a prankster, a rider. But there wasn't any snow 2 hours beforehand. The tracks were new, vacant. I slept not that night. I did stay near the edge of the hallway, griping a kitchen knife, with the front door and back door prepared behind but open and available, and gripping a lamp burning light in close proximity like a clumsy sentinel. The hours passed slowly. The shadows crept across. But nothing else happened afterward. The house was still again, but the stillness itself hummed with anticipation. By Sunday morning, I'd talked myself out of it being a neighborhood nice guy thief, some kid around the block perhaps. That afternoon rolled around and evening crept its way toward night with nothing to prove it, though I couldn't help but think that someone was behind me. Every creaking outside a window required attention. Every creep of the house had me half dead with terror. I awoke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound that I still hear in my nightmares. It wasn't a knock, not this time. It was the whine of a dog, but we didn't own one. It was on the back porch, tattered, dripping, and where it shouldn't be, but wrapped in blankets, held tight against the chin. I heard it. The whine came again, louder this time to cover the baseboard from end to end to the bedroom window. There, then, slowing, scratching on the siding. My breath was stolen. Feints ceased. Then, nothing. Then the instant I had mustered the courage to sit up in bed, another noise. Low, non-human hum. Not singing. It had been flat and slow and mechanical, like some man warbling a lullaby between grinding teeth. I crept over close to the window, shaking hands, and parted the curtain an inch on one side, slowly. I shouldn't have looked. Slouching in the window, a black long coat. Head thrown back, mouth open wide as if singing along silently, though humming continued. Eyes closed, arms at his sides, fingers drumming a rhythm. Breath fogging glass lightly, and he back and forth in motion like a pendulum. I fell to the floor, pounding heart pounding in my chest, locked body seized by terror. I couldn't think. I couldn't catch my breath. I curled up on the floor for what felt like an eternity, trying to gasp for air. Finally, after I managed to summon enough strength to grab another glance, he was nowhere. No step, no sound, nothing but the fading resonance of his breathing on glass. Lost. The police returned. They discovered nothing. They weren't so certain anymore. I could tell from looking at their eyes, skepticism, even amusement. They informed me that they would alert the area neighbors and instructed me to lock doors, as if locks on doors would keep something like that from occurring. Monday morning dawned in that sort of gray stillness that makes the world seem a bit unreal. I just sat at the table in the kitchen and stared blankly into space, and only nibbled at something indistinct. The footsteps, the scratching, the humming. There was the sense of the house being stamped, owned. My parents were arriving home in the evening. I reassured myself that I could keep going until then. Then suddenly, without notice, at 4:00 p.m., the lights shut off. House was still. No hum of fridge, no whine of heater, no lights. Black so thick air was thick with it. I was in the hall staring through dark windows, and that's when I saw it. Basement door creaking open. We never ever really managed to complete utilizing the basement. It was chilly, unfinished, dusty, and just packed with dusty old furniture on the inside. I grunted up to it, step against nature. I leaned on wood, silent. I stuck my head in, stalled, and turned the handle slowly and swung open the door. The black below was done. I went down a step, another by the beam of my flashlight. The air grew colder with every step down, as if into the world's lungs. I reached bottom and swept the beam out across the basement. Empty. But in the back left corner, a reflection of something caught the beam. A single chair. standing tidily in the middle of the concrete, wedged up against the wall, and on the wall, a smear of whatever black substance this was. Other than the chair, something else was in pieces, my family picture, the frame. I don't recall screaming. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My breath was taken away from me. I ran and I glanced back, upstairs through the house and out the front door into the snow. I stood outside in the cold, bare feet until my parents returned home an hour later. Police were called again. They searched the whole house afterward. They discovered a crawl space behind the basement wall. Behind it, they saw evidence: tears and trash bags of French fry box wrapping and a blanket. Someone had occupied it. In my home. Police never brought the man in. No fingerprints, no ID, anything. The basement window lock was busted. That's where he got in. That's how he tailed me around. He was never attempting to break in. He was already inside. He just stood there as I went in and out, back and forth, through all the various rooms. Ate, slept, called the police, locked all the doors. During all of this, he sat silently, calmly, and motionless behind the wall. All that a long, long time ago, all right? I never went back to the house. My parents sold it. I'm in the city now, with noise and people and lights. But every now and then, late at night when the wind is blowing in that direction, I just know I can hear it again. That humming, low, sound of a machine, droning. And I wonder if maybe I never did leave him there. Or maybe he just found some other wall to hide behind. It would be a night out, plain, not out of the ordinary. A break from monotony, a night away from the stifling routine of my work, the concrete building that contained me, and the dead silence that I was met with every night. The invitation had come from a work friend, a woman whose acquaintance I had only through office correspondence, but my yearning for something more overrode my best sense. I convinced myself it was okay. I convinced myself that I needed this. The club was in the back of the alleyway between two empty buildings on a skinny side street I had never even seen before, rolling through there all these years. No marquee over the door. Just a blackness of a doorway with a row of something down the side of a rusting staircase and a broken security camera sticking out to lip-kiss the gutter. But as if people spilled out of it like moths around some invisible flame. No queue, no groaning that spilled out onto the pavement. Only silent, but all went in as if called by something greater than sense. I did. The air was altered suddenly. It stuck to my skin, wet and heavy, near humid but not. Walls were dark, deep red, either blood or velvet. I couldn't quite identify which in the poor light. There was music, but music not to dance to. It thudded, low, animal, thrumming through the floor and into the bones like a living heartbeat. It was natural bass, and I had no idea if it was being played through speakers or some more primitive apparatus in the walls themselves. They moved slowly, not drunk, but dazedly. Their eyes were glued, silent and motionless, as if no thoughts were happening in their brains. All white faces, and in the crowds as well, I noticed something eerily weird. Nobody was talking. Lips were still. No laugh burst, no yelling above the beat, only the moving, mangled, and mechanized. I attempted to console myself into believing that it was a new trend, some weird subculture or underground disorder that I had no idea was out there. I might have walked into the scene of some new high-end pushing the envelope experiment. But the farther I walked, the more bewildered I became. There were plenty of bartenders, out of sight behind the counter, but setting their drinks out in front of people who stood in line. I saw no fingers forming them, no notion whatsoever of who had put them out. The drinks themselves emitted softly, colors beyond my perception, colors that changed without being of this world. There were no questions, no uncertainty. I shoved a man and I could feel it. His body was cold against mine, not metaphorically. My body did it automatically, shying back. But he didn't blink, didn't even blink, just continued on, his eyes wide open with pupils dilated to unnatural, almost filling out the whites of his eyes. I should have left. I knew that. All the nerve endings craved freedom. And I stayed, trapped in something I did not even know was there. Curiosity, perhaps. Or else, something that had been seeded inside me. I was able to push into a hallway by the rear, where the throng became thinner. The hallway narrowed to the point that I had to slide sideways, the walls squeezing in on me, pushing me forward like a birth canal. The music gave out here, to be replaced by a humming like the resonance of a tuning fork embedded in the skull. I should have backed off. I didn't. The hallway led out into a tiny round room. There was no lamp, no light, but I could see. It didn't make sense. Space emitted some unseen light with no origin point. A mirror, tall and costly and out of place, sat in the center. The reflection was not of what was present. It was fractions away to begin with, then further and further. I raised my hand to my face, but the reflection didn't look like me. It glared, it watched, it waited. My reflection cocked its head to the side, but I hadn't. I stepped back, my heart pounding. It was behind the glass. Not me, not really. A shadow of me, lacking something essential. It smiled, but mine didn't curve. And it approached. Not illusion, not reflection. It advanced. That was when the room spun around me. The air solidified, heavy on my lungs like plaster. The walls pulsed with a living energy, veins that seemed to throb under red wallpaper, as if the building itself lived and breathed. There was a muted, throaty sound coming from the walls, a blend of chant and growl, low and throbbing, like ritual. I'd run. No sense of direction, no recollection of how I'd come to be on the main floor once more. The music had become more intense now, frenzied, cacophonous, 100 off-key hearts. Eyes flashed my way as I appeared, each face pulling in my direction. Their faces stayed flat, unchanging, as if noting me for the first time, as if taking note that I didn't belong. And then they smiled. Dozens of wide, stretched smiles, stretched too wide across their faces by something just beneath the surface. And then they smiled at me, narrow and near animal, row after row like the jaws of a shark, with glinting points in them, oscillation by oscillation moving. They moved closer all together, like some mass organism reacting to some stimulus that I hadn't sensed. I ran away. The front door had vanished. There was a wall, sleek and unblemished. I touched it, but the surface shook like skin, engulfing my fingers for an instant before spitting them out. The music was in my head now, humming at the back of my eyes, creating flashes of jagged pain like lightning in the head. I blundered into a staircase, descending in darkness. The steps curled where I stood, descending below what made sense physically. The building did not make sense. I lost track of how many floors I descended, how far I had walked. Below, light was entirely absent, yet even so I could feel shadows, moving, flowing, whispering on a pitch above human hearing. The stairs went into a gigantic room. The slippery but hard surface beneath my feet was like the slick surface of the oil, and in the middle of it there lay a circle of people. They were tall and featureless, faceless but for grooves deeply carved into their flesh, symbols that welled black mist. They were singing silently. Their presence was so oppressive, as though they stood on the brink of an abyss that knew you, deeply, intimately, ways that you did not know yourself. They were in a cluster before me, and the room yawned open to light, not resplendent but overwhelming, seeping over, through me, stripping the outer skin from self and remembrance. I saw them in my mind, stripping away the layers of what I believed I was, peeling thoughts from thoughts, memories from memories, not cruel, unfeeling, interested. Then I regarded myself, on a bone table, circled by the same group, my eyes open but not shutting, my mouth agape in soundless scream, my chest expanding and contracting, but my soul lost, gone, swapped out, watching. And then I awakened, or so I believed. I was on the sidewalk, outside the club, drenched in sweat, among strangers who did not recognize me and who walked past me. There was no door, no building, just a vacant alleyway between two dilapidated tenements. The street was vacant. No cars, no lights, nothing. I stumbled home not knowing if anything had occurred at all. But that evening, when I caught sight of myself in the mirror, I knew. My reflection smiled back at me before I could. Then, I was never alone. Not quite. I started to catch myself out in inconsistencies in my mirror self, uncoordinated blinks, uncoordinated head movements, smiles that disappeared before I had even seen them. I attributed it at first to stress, a lingering hallucination, a flight of fancy. But other people picked up on it too. I was accused by a friend of smiling in the bathroom mirror when I hadn't even entered the bathroom. My neighbor said she waved at me out of her window, which I had never even entered. My own home security camera detected motion when no one was home, ghostly figures moving room to room, lights turning on and off in a pattern too intentional to be chance. I had wrapped mirrors, but reflections lingered in windows and screens and puddles. That aspect of me, whatever it was, had trailed. Not whole, not in the body, but it had stuck with me. A ghostly parasite, a faulty twin left behind at that place. It knew me better than anyone. It was me in all the ways that mattered, except that it had no fear or morals or human weakness. Sometimes in the middle of the night I wake up and find it standing at the foot of my bed, breathless, frozen, immobile, but only looking. And when I close my eyes again, it disappears. But I sense its smile in the dark. I did see a therapist. The psychologist explained that it was dissociation, trauma, unworked through unconscious fear. She did not go on to work with me beyond 2 sessions. I discovered she had relocated. No forwarding contact, no telephone call. I've attempted everything, rituals, exorcisms, insomnia, even hallucinogens in desperation to battle it. Nothing holds it back. It derives strength from attention, from knowledge. The more I focus on it, the stronger it gets. And now it has started to mimic not only me but others as well. I observe people act peculiarly. Friends, family members, strangers, something so subtly wrong in their words, in their eyes, in their stride. It's contagious. I have no idea what that building was. A gateway? A ritual space? Some living entity masquerading as a building? I can only tell you that it did not welcome visitors. It needed vessels. And I dumbly invited it in. If ever you get a letter of invitation to a club without a name, on an unnamed street that never shows up on any map, destroy it. Remove it from the earth's face. Forget it. For once you're in, it never quite lets you out. And the you that returns isn't quite you anymore. It was the sort of night that seemed to have been composed of something more evil and older than nature. The rain lashed down relentlessly, a deluge cascading out of the black heavens like the wrath of an outraged, forgotten god, and the wind a voice, a deep, nigh on silent but deeply disturbing one. I never was one to consider omens, signs, and portents said to foretell, but this night made me question all of them. I'd gone the longer way home, not by necessity, but by necessity. A landslide had closed the highway, and I'd been forced to take the back roads across the forest fringes of town. The road was not known to me, twisted, rural, and in places broken where rain had consumed a part of the earth. My windshield wipers struggled against rain with feeble determination, applying rain on the windshield rather than sweeping it off. A mockery, and I drove anyway. My cell phone had no signal, only the occasional flash of low battery warning, the only reminder that I still had access to the world I knew, and even that seemed far away. The further I traveled, the more I felt I was going in, not to some destination, but into some state. The road itself wasn't going somewhere, I felt, but away from reason. Then I drove 40 minutes in crawl, saw a figure on the road, Slammed on the brakes, tires screeching for an instant on rain-soaked road. The figure did not move, did not blink. A woman. Her hair was stuck to her face, and her white nightgown stuck to her, wet like a shroud. Stood rigidly still, arms straight down at sides, eyes staring straight ahead. All my instincts screamed at me to just keep going. But something else, something older, baser hunger, began to drive me forward. I rolled down the window so I could shout over the storm. "Do you need help?" She didn't answer. She just turned, slowly, deliberately, and began to move towards the passenger side of the car. My heart beat in my chest, its rhythm sounding louder in my ears than the rain. She got into the car and sat down quietly. She was there. Wrong. Not in the overtly angry manner, but on some underlying level askew. The energy of the car changed the minute she climbed into it, had become more choking, denser. I once again tried to speak, to ask her where she was heading, but my throat closed off. My voice would not cooperate. Something intangible had plugged my mouth closed. I drove on. The road narrowed away into the distance, trees bordering it like eyelids. They pushed their branches out and skimmed across the car as we passed underneath, scratching along the roof in rough, jerky shreds. The woman drove straight on, eyes never swerving. She smoothed once with her hand the clotted wet hair scrubbing back against her face. No more. She didn't even try to wrap herself up warm, to speak, to register my presence. I saw her once. Only once. And what I saw tormented me afterward. Her face in the window was not where she was. It regarded me, not out on the highway. Its mouth was open like it screamed, but nobody heard a thing. Its eyes were black, not dark. Black. I looked back at her, throat constricted, but she didn't budge. I said nothing. The car was immediately cold. Way too cold. I turned the heat on, but that did nothing for it. My own breath frosted the windshield. Hers didn't. Miles whizzed by, or maybe minutes. I don't know. Time began to break down. My watch had stopped. The dashboard clock flashed a frozen hour. I should have been near home by then, but the road refused to yield, and the woman gestured. Her arm rose with no trouble, easily, and she pointed down a dirt road that branched off the highway, half hidden in weeds. The trees there were crooked, robust, as if man had not touched them in years. The road was not supposed to be seen, and yet it was, illuminated by a beam of moonlight that had discovered a break in the clouds. I spun around. Why did I spin? To this day, I have no idea. Maybe it was she. Maybe it was my own corruption, a tawdry, ravenous desire to go in pursuit of that which is best left behind. The tires screeched gravel as I turned onto the trail. The woods shut down around us, and the storm vanished. No rain, no wind, but only a strangling object silence that was louder than anything I'd ever heard. The path extended out into the open. There, in the center of the open, stood a house. Its appearance was all awry, asymmetrical, windowless, more like a mausoleum than a house. Stony walls slick with moss. A single wooden door, ajar. No lights, no life. The woman opened the car door and proceeded towards the house. She went toward the house, slow and cautious steps. She did not glance back. I should have turned around, should have run toward the trees, screamed into emptiness for aid, but instead I trailed behind. Inside, the air reeked of rot. There was the scent of rot, mildew, and something else, something metallic, hanging in the air. The walls bore strange markings, carvings maybe, symbols I didn't recognize but which stirred something primal and terrifying in the back of my head. The woman was gone. I screamed, finally regaining my voice, but no one answered. Inside the house it was far less empty than it had seemed, room after room flowing into the next, the configuration impossible to learn or follow. The floors that I stood on groaned in peculiar rhythms as if someone else's footsteps. I was being observed, not by a solitary voyeur, but by dozens, and then I saw them, photos, dozens of them, On the walls, spread out on tables, tacked into the wood with rusty tacks. Faces, all vacant faces, each of them smeared in precisely the same way, the eyes torn out, the mouth twisted, and in the middle of them, I saw my own. Taken that evening through my windshield, the rain still on the glass. My knees collapsed. My head reeled. This was not a house. It was a trap. A refuge of some evil, constructed not of stone and wood, but of remembrance, sadness, and fear. And I had walked in blindly. I stepped back to go, and she did not move. But she was different. The woman's body twisted into impossible forms, her limbs stretched, twisting her spine into sadistic twists. Her face ripped, opening up like wet paper to reveal a nothingness, a void of bottomless black. Her scream never hit the air, but I could feel it resonating within my head, ripping the very fabric of mind asunder. I could feel her inside me, moving. I ran. I don't remember walking back to the car. My memories break there, splinter into impressions that aren't mine. Her fingernails against my neck, other people's blood in my boots, voices shouting out names that weren't mine. The car started. Some way, somewhere, the car started. I drove crazily, vision hazy with rain and tears and blood. The woods flashed past me, twigs scratching against my windows like claws to trap me. Time was confused. I drove until the sky started lightening, until I caught sight of the town's horizon. No one believed me. The police arrived, and there was nothing there where I had taken them. No dirt road, no house, no indication that ever a building existed there. The storm had leveled everything to nothing, they told me. Hallucination, trauma, sleep deprivation. But I know what really happened. Because I still see her. Not in dreams, not in mirrors, but in strangers' eyes. In crevice space where I am sure I have been. In the space between the drums. She waits, waiting for me to reclaim what I took when I fled. Myself. I have never been the same since. The world is smaller and colder. I can feel what lies beneath it, tracing up with fingers of thought and loss and years. So if you are driving home late one rainy night, and you see a woman standing on the side of the road, don't stop, no matter how desperate, no matter how real she is. Do not stop. Because once she becomes part of your life, she never really leaves. And on a day when rain will be so perfectly right and night so still, she'll be waiting for you to come back, home, to nothing, to her, forever. I moved to a new town in a week, left it all behind, my job, my apartment, even the car. I couldn't bear to be behind that wheel again, not after what I'd been through. I promised myself it would work. That distance and denial would be enough. That rebuilding in some antiseptic city girded with light and sound would put that night out of mind. But some memories aren't echoes, they're seeds, and once planted, they take root. It began quietly, as all horrors tend to. Flickers at the edge of my vision. Objects in my apartment moving slightly out of alignment. Clocks sticking at the same time. 3:19 a.m. I changed the batteries, swapped them out entirely, and still the hands would stop at that very time, as if frozen in something bigger than electricity or time. And the voices, not said, not out loud, but other people's thoughts, intrusions into the vacant rooms of my brain. No tone, no voice, but meaning alone, and constantly repeating the same thing over and over again like a bad hymn. Return, return, return. My nightmares were more intense. I was standing outside that impossible house again in them, the wind thick with the scent of damp earth and mortality. I never entered, but I woke each morning with old wood on my lips, mud smeared across my fingers. I had a splinter buried deep beneath my thumbnail one evening. I had not left my apartment all night. I began to break down. In body, I wasted away. Sleepless, weightless, losing focus. In mind, I was crumbling. Friends stopped calling. Co-workers muttered. A neighbor knocked once to ask if I was fine after I screamed loudly enough to rattle the walls. I hadn't realized I screamed. On my bathroom mirror, messages began appearing after showers. written into the steam like ulcers in the mist. She waits. You promised. Come home. I woke up one morning to a yawning open front door. No break and enter. No indication that something had been stolen. Just footprints, bare, wet, and in. And then I saw her once more. Not breathing, no. That would have been too generous to her. She stood in the TV static, in puddles, in the manner the shadows crept on the ceiling when no ray of light could have caused them to creep so. She was not a woman anymore. Her form shifted, liquid, stretched, pushed aside. But the sensation was always the same. She was nearer and closer with each passing day. I asked for help, therapy, medication. I even talked to a priest, though I had lost all faith to offer. They had words, diagnoses, suggestions, scripture. None of them stuck. None of them sliced the emptiness in me that she had occupied, for I had led her out. She had accompanied me, not unwillingly, but willingly. The moment I stopped at that street, the moment I invited her into my car, into my life, I was a receptacle. And now, she was changing inside me. The final night came suddenly. The rain returned after weeks of dryness, ripping at the city with a ferocity that was familiar to that vile night. The thunder shook the windows. The electricity flickered on at 2 a.m. Candle lit, I sat in my kitchen chair and waited by the door, knowing the door would swing open very, very soon. And it did. Not jerking. Not bursting. Slowly creaking open like blown open by the breath of your mouth. She was there. Or what was left of her. A dripping shadow shape, her limbs curled over as if she still hadn't learned how to take up the space of a human. Her face was mine. I screamed and screamed, but my voice broke. My body would not listen. Every cell of me knew the truth. This was not an intruder. This was a homecoming. She took one step closer. Every step echoed impossibly louder, as though she was treading on the surface of my mind. Every step witnessed the memories shattering. Names, faces, locations. Who I was before that night, I had no idea. I couldn't recall even why I'd fled. And she touched me. It wasn't a touch. It was something inside. Her hand went through my chest and took something from me. My breath, my heat, myself were all with it. Instead, I existed in her memories. An avalanche of someone else's suffering. A fleeting life destroyed. A lost betrayal ingrained. She waited, not for revenge, but for validation, for understanding, for someone to carry her story, to be her story. And I did. The neighbors noticed nothing out of the ordinary the following day. Just a quiet apartment. A man who had become increasingly visible over the past couple of weeks, now utterly vanished. No sign of a struggle, no sign of something breathing. Just one photo tacked to the back of the front door. It was blurry, eyes erased, modified mouth, and in the distance, a haze of fog on the windshield of a car, a woman in white staring straight into the camera, waiting, still waiting. I have always believed that the human mind was far more fragile than we would care to admit. It is not the grotesque or the monstrous that destroys it, but the creeping erosion of reality, the minute fissures in reason, the unaccountable instants we cannot explain but cannot dismiss. I learned this not from a textbook or a teacher, but from a cabin in the forest where winter never truly passed, and where something else lurked beneath the ice. It was the second week of January when I first arrived at the cabin. I'd rented it for quiet, for writing and contemplation. City living had become stifling. Too much noise, too many faces, and not enough chance to simply be in silence. The ad had guaranteed isolation, quiet, snow-covered hills, and a frozen lake that vanished into the woods. I had no reason to believe otherwise. The first 2 days were normal. The cold was bitter but tolerable. I comforted myself in the wood piled against the side of the cabin, in the soft hiss of the kettle on the stove. in the soft creak of old wood contracting under frost. I spent the hours staring out the big front windows at the snow falling, the kind that made the whole forest appear like a painting. No messages traveled that far. No calls, no texts, no distractions. It was appreciated by me then. But on the third night, I sensed something. Something so minute, I questioned if it was there at all. It began as a sound, soft, almost musical, like the gradual caressing of wind along the cabin side. I had mistaken it for the trees creaking in the tempest. But it was the rhythm that unsettled me. A beat too consistent, too deliberate. It came at intervals of 30 or 40 seconds. I had dismissed it at first, reassuring myself that it was the splitting of ice on the lake widening. By the fifth cycle, I was in front of the window with the fire behind me, looking into the darkness beyond the glass. The moon was concealed. The forest, otherwise so serene beneath the snow, was different. Not savage, not even passively menacing, just frozen, looking at me, as if the universe outside had ceased to move in order to wait for the hope of my enlightenment. There was no one there. There was only the echo of that brushing sound, distant and persistent. I went back to bed reassuring myself that loneliness had got the better of me. But when I woke up the following morning, I found something that totally redefined the nature of my sojourn. Footprints in the snow under the living room window were there. One set, human, bare. They walked from the woods to the cabin, halted right in front of the window, and disappeared. No back trail, no sidetrack, nothing at all. I watched them for almost 10 minutes, unable to create a sane explanation. The depth of the prints indicated they had been created recently, perhaps during my sleep. But how could a person walk barefoot in snow at sub-zero temperatures and just poof? I tried to brush it aside. Perhaps they were ancient. Perhaps the wind had covered the trail out. I buried them under snow, thinking I could wipe the moment from my mind in the same way. But the noise returned that night, closer this time. It did not sound like wind anymore. It sounded clearer, like fingernails slowly scraping over old wood. I tried to sleep, but it would not arrive. My mind stayed awake long past my body's desire for rest, tumbling over thoughts that I could not silence. I continued repeating to myself the cabin was old. Old things creak in groans and whispers. At around 3 a.m., something happened that consumed all rationale I had held on to. I was in bed, eyes closed, when I felt pressure, gentle, almost imperceptible, beneath the mattress. Creeping up, subtle leaning, as though something enormous had lain its weight on the frame from below. My breathing lodged in my chest. I did not move, could not. No sound, no reassurance that I wasn't imagining. But in that moment, I was sure of one thing. When morning came, the power was out. The lights didn't function. The stove, cold to the touch. The firewood I had stored within, gone, not lost, not burned, just gone. I had left it on the ground beside the hearth. No door was opened, no tracks in the snow. And still, it was gone. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. People go mad from isolation in strange manners, but madness is often blind. I was noticing every strange thing, every inconsistency. If I were insane, I would not be able to have this record. I would be laughing at the wind, not cowering from it. By the sixth night, the forest itself had changed. It no longer grew to be a place of peace. The trees darkened, not in color, but being there. I could not help but gaze at them through the window for hours on end. Their silence was unnatural, as if something greater than me had made them stand still. No birds, no wind, no movement, and the sound had moved again. It now crept across the cabin, round and round in slow, gentle circles. I could not see its source. It left no prints this time. But the sound was clearer than ever before. Not footsteps, not pause, something between. Like arms too long to be a man's, scrabbling along the wood as if searching the frame. Then the scratching. It started low on the north wall shortly before dawn, distant like fingers tracing old wallpaper. It expanded inch by inch until it was at the ceiling, and then it ceased. The silence that followed was more crushing than any noise. I did not sleep that night. I wrote less and viewed more. I ceased to burn the fire, not wishing whatever was on the other side to notice it. I stayed in darkness, the inside of the cabin colder than the outside. I wrapped myself in all of the blankets that I could find and sat still, listening. It was then that I began to understand the nature of the presence. It was not trying to kill me. It was watching, learning, waiting. I recalled old stories, legend from past civilizations, of creatures that existed between dream and reality, things that did not devour flesh, but the decay of reason, parasites of perception. I wondered if I had stepped into a world abandoned by time, where such things still lingered. On the 8th day, I found a symbol carved in the wall behind the stove. I had never seen anything like it in my life. A neat circle with a vertical slash through the center, as if an eye with a pupil. The wood was sliced cleanly through, as if something pointed and ancient had cut it in one movement. I tried to paint over it. It was back the following morning, black, darker, ringed with 3 smaller punctures I hadn't seen previously. I set out to leave my belongings that day. I was going to leave at dawn. The nearest road was nearly 5 miles away, but I didn't care anymore. I would walk through the snow until my legs gave out if necessary. The cabin breathed that evening. I don't say this metaphorically. The walls caved in. The floor tilted. The air in the room became denser, as though the building itself was an animal, quivering, gasping, pulling me inside it. I retreated, slammed into the door. It wouldn't open. None of them would. I was hemmed in. I screamed then, not of terror, but of helplessness. The silence that replied was worse than any noise. I fell to my knees, panting, and prayed for the first time since our arrival. Not to a god I knew, not to any name I recognized. I prayed to the forest, to the wind, to whatever primeval power had been waiting, watching me, and begged it to let me go. And for a moment, I thought it did. The walls reeled back, the doors creaked open, the lights flickered on again, and the cacophony stopped. I ran. I didn't look back. I left behind my luggage, my computer, everything. I tore through the snow in a fury I had never felt before, running until my lungs burned and my knees buckled. I fell onto the highway hours later, frostbitten and disoriented, flagged down a snowplow and never returned. They never located the cabin again. I gave them the coordinates. The ad disappeared. The land registry informed me it never existed. And yet, I can remember every inch of that land with a clarity that haunts me. The smell of the cedar walls, the whistle of the kettle, the eyes I never saw looking through the trees. It has been 2 years. I live in a city now. People, noise, light. But every now and then, late at night, after the world has grown still, I hear it again. That light, measured scratch against something, somewhere just beyond the walls. It waits, and it reminds me. I'd told myself that I had gotten away, that what I experienced in that cabin was a contained nightmare tied to a place, something I could outrun, forget, or lose in the clamor of civilization. But I was wrong. You cannot forget certain things, and worse, some places do not let you go because you leave them. The noise remained. It began quietly, perhaps a week or so after I returned. I heard it in the silence between subway trains, in the space between the cacophony of footsteps down my apartment hallway. That scraping, dragging beat I had originally attributed to wind. It had returned, not with fury, but with relentlessness. A shivering reminder that distance made no difference to it. I relocated apartments 3 times. I met doctors, psychiatrists. I underwent sleep tests, MRIs, even tried experimental sensory deprivation therapy. Always the same. I was sane, healthy, and yet every doctor or psychiatrist who questioned me for too long appeared to become subdued, as if something behind my glare was watching them. Then came the dreams. They did not come every night, but when they did, they came with maddening distinctness. I would be taken back to the cabin, except something was wrong. The walls were closer. The windows no longer showed snow, but an interminable darkness outside, as if the forest had been devoured. And in the center of the room was a figure, never moving, never speaking, looking at me with a face I could not see. The dreams were always the same, with the feeling of pressure pushing down from below the floorboards, as if something massive was shuffling up through the foundations. I began losing time, an hour gone here, a void in my agenda there. I would find things shifted where I had left them, scratches beneath the furniture, little scratches in the wood, such as claws rubbing in curves, my nails ground down, my fingertips inflamed. I began to tape myself up at night, only to see hours of tape where I stood at my bedroom window, fixed, gazing out into the street. One night I woke up to find a mark on my mirror, the same one I'd seen etched on the cabin wall, the circle cut by a vertical slash. The mark had not been written in steam or ink, but in blood. My blood. Then I knew this was no ghost. It was an anchor. A bond formed not of location but of experience, like I had come too close to something ancient and it had marked me. Not to kill me, but to dismantle me piece by piece, slowly, agonizingly. To watch the disintegration of a human soul from the inside out. And I was falling apart. I isolated myself from all of the people that I knew. Friends no longer called. My family believed that I was cracking up. I couldn't fault them. There are no words to explain what it's like to be pursued by something which never appears, only suggests. I was no longer existing within a physical realm of threat, but an existential one of suppressed psychological decline. Then, 2 nights ago, something changed. I awoke at 3:14 a.m., the same time I would hear the scratching in the cabin, but tonight nothing, no movement, only an odor. Cedar, the very smell that had permeated the cabin, earthy and sweet, incapable of being mimicked by mistake. It scented my apartment, quiet, but unmistakable. I left bed and stepped into the hallway. The lights were dim, wobbling. I crept slowly towards the living room, every nerve in my body coiled with tension, and there it was. Not a man, not an animal, but a doorway. Standing in the middle of my apartment floor, where no doorway had ever existed. Tall, black, surrounded by wood that curled like burning smoke. At its core, darkness, total and absolute, not shadow but emptiness. I should have been running, screaming, praying, but I didn't feel anything, only comprehension. The cabin had not been a room, but a border, a test, and I had disobeyed it by returning to the world, by pretending it was over. Whatever wisdom had passed through that structure had not done with me, and now it had reached out to take me again. I stood before the portal, and something inside it stirred, not forward, but upward, from below, a colossal pressure, as though something gigantic was rising to meet me, not from outside the stars, but from under the very fabric of consciousness. I knew then what it truly was, not a demon, not a ghost, but a witness. Something that is there to see the disintegration of meaning, to quietly document the slow death of reality in the heads of those who get too close. It doesn't destroy, it waits. I stepped back. The doorway remained for a few minutes. Then, without sound, it folded in on itself and was gone. But I know it's not done. I know it will return. Not as a place, or a goal, or a sound, but as a final invitation, one I will not be able to refuse. I feel it in the silence between seconds, in the static between radio voices, in the burst at the edge of each mirror. The cabin is out of the woods. It is inside me, and it is watching. I have never feared the ocean. I once admired it. Its enormity was a wondering solace, a balance that reminded me of how tiny I was, how temporary everything else was in relation to its endless rhythm. Now, though, I hate to look at it. The crashing waves, the brine scent hanging in the air, the far-off call of gulls. No longer do they calm me. They awaken something in me, a nagging dread that I am unable to shake. For I saw something I should not have seen. And worse yet, I brought it back with me. It began late in September, when the season was ending. The beach town I visited was a quiet one on the southeastern coast, a town where the crowds disappeared as quickly as they had appeared for summer. I had traveled there alone, seeking isolation after inner conflict. My thoughts were muddled, my sleep fitful. I imagined the ocean would calm me. I had no idea it would say anything to me. The beach was nearly empty when I got there. There were some stray footprints in the sand, but the wind scattered them too. The air was clean, the horizon grayed and thinned. It was the kind of silence that was sacred, a breathed quiet preserved and sacred in which even the birds shrieking sounded like an interruption. I had leased a small bungalow on the dunes, plain, wrinkled, and off the beaten part of town. It suited me. I strolled down to the beach on my second night at twilight. The sky was the bruise metal color, and the waves advanced like gigantic sleeping monsters, gigantic and immobile. That is where I saw something unusual, a form of a man standing waist deep in water, not moving. I had thought initially that perhaps it was a fisherman, but when I got closer, I realized that it was not moving, not with the wind, not with the tide. The ocean had just spat the thing up and left it. I got to where the figure was when it was gone. No footprints, no sign that any person had passed through. At last, the sand had not been moved. I stood watching the water, fidgeting. Not for the first time had I seen things in my head. I was well aware that isolation can play tricks on the mind. But there was something about this vision that stayed with me. The stillness of the figure, its utter failure to respond. It didn't feel like I'd looked at a person, and more like I'd been stared at. That night, I was shocked by a sudden noise of rushing water, not rain, not groaning, rusty pipes. It was heavier, intentional. I moved from my bed to the back room of the cottage, following the sound. Nothing was dripping, nothing was wet, but the smell of the ocean was pungent, as if the tide had come in inside my house. I looked at the doors. They were closed. I convinced myself that I must have left a window open, although I knew that I had not. The second day, the world was out of kilter. The sky was still gray, but now the air was heavy, the pressure in the air that signals a storm. I went to the beach in the afternoon and saw the same individual, again waist-deep in waves, again completely motionless. I did not this time rise from my seat. I sat back, heart tightening. Something was not right in the manner in which it stood. Its posture was unnatural, its limbs not even, as if wood carried by sea had taken on human form, and then before my very eyes it gradually sank beneath the water, not as if tugged down, not as if swimming. It just fell, like descending a hidden staircase into nothing. I was frozen. I don't know how to explain why I didn't scream, why I didn't flee. No one else saw it. No witness to carry the weight of what I'd seen. And deep in the marrow of my bones somewhere I knew I had not seen a man. I'd seen something else. Something old. Something from the sea. Dripping had come back in the evening once more. Near now. I woke to wet sheets and dripping boards, though I'd closed all the windows, all the doors. I was dripping like were my clothes, and inside the cottage smelled of sour rot and salt water. In the mirror I appeared paler, pinched. My eyes appeared darker, deeper. I did not recall dreaming, but I felt that I had traveled huge distances within my dreams, miles below the surface of something not subject to measurable depth. The fourth day, folks back home began noticing me. Not welcoming, not warm. They stared, they complained, and went away. An old lady, wrapped in a great shawl on nice weather, approached me in the marketplace. Her eye did not blink. Her shakily grasping hand rose, pointed out towards the ocean. "You shouldn't have gone near water," she said. I wanted to ask her what she was telling me, but she left before I had a chance to say anything. That was the last time somebody looked into my eyes. The figure reappeared at night again, closer this time, at the edge of the tide, no longer ankle-deep but knee-deep. And when the sun crept into the sea, it glared directly at me. There was no face, just an empty, hollowed-out space where there should have been one. No eyes, but I could sense its eyes probe to every level of my being. I was on the ground, consumed by something that I can't put words to, a fear so deeply ingrained that it was primal, ancestral. Like my people had fled from this beast before I ever breathed in the world. I lost hours after that. Hours, perhaps a day. I awoke face down on the sand, palms scorched and mouth stuffed with sand. My skin was chill, wet and bruised with minuscule scratches, like scraped on rock or coral. The cottage was devastated. Water was pooled on the floors. The white walls were stained with black mold, and in the mirror I didn't recognize myself. My eyes were bloodshot, my blue-stained fingernails, my pale and cracked lips. I tried to leave the town that day. I packed what little I had and drove north along the coast. But hours went by and I looped back onto the same beach, as if the road looped back on itself, or time curled up in a hidden manner. I saw the twisted tree alongside the dunes, the weathered warning sign regarding hazardous currents. The same one-eyed seagull flew overhead. I could not leave. Not by car, not by choice. I locked all the doors. I shut the windows. I lit sage. I prayed, although I do not believe in anything. I attempted to sleep, as I was dressed, flashlight in hand. But I did not sleep. I was abducted. I remember only fragments. The cold, sweaty hands wrapping around my ankles, the weight of water in my lungs. Seeing infinite darkness spread out below me, thick with motion. Creatures that had no right to flesh or bone. And above them all, a sound. A dry, gurgling growl as if the ocean was speaking, whispering in a language older than speech. When I awoke, I was different. Not myself. My memories were broken. My mind heavy and twisted. I began dreaming about the deep, one of cities in the impossible built on the bottom of the ocean, of rituals performed at pressure that would kill the human form. I began hearing the whispers in the walls, in the waves, and when I returned to the beach, the figure was no longer alone. There were three now, all faceless, all motionless, watching. I have no idea what I brought back with me, whether it is an entity, a curse, or a state of unadulterated madness. I just know that I am no longer alone in my own head. I can feel it roaming around in me, having a laugh with my mind. My body is weakening day by day. My skin peels off in strips. My breath is salty and rotten. I am unable to eat. I am unable to dream. I remain at the cottage, trapped here. The villagers avoid this section of beach now. They know. They recall. Perhaps they have witnessed others like me, those who gazed too long into the abyss and were called back. I believe the ocean keeps a record. It keeps in its mind those who trespass. And it demands. I am writing this today not as a warning, but as a witness. There is no sanctuary. There is no antidote. The ocean does not forgive. It waits. Forever. Indefinitely. And when it calls to you, when it claims you, there is no place on this planet that you can hide. Last night I was standing in the waves, knee-deep, still, watching. Tonight, I will delve deeper. And tomorrow, I will not return. I don't remember wading in the water, but I remember the cold. Not the kind that seizes flesh and freezes joints. It was a cold, deeper, one that sliced inward, past bone and marrow, and back to the soul. As if the ocean was wet, not merely wet, but alive. It did not wrap around me. It held on. The water drew around my legs in unrhythms. The waves no longer rolled with wind or moon, but for me, perhaps because I had changed something fundamental in their nature, I waited knee-deep, staring into the hollowness of the horizon. There were no stars above, no clouds, only one plane of blackness, echoing the hollowness within me. I waited. Behind me, the sand lay still. The village no longer existed. The universe had drawn back. There was silence, broken only by the dull, leaden trickle of water on my skin, and by the remote, measureless beat which I had known initially in dreams. It accelerated with each respiration, thudding against my heart like the sonorous beat of some primordial hymn. Then came they, alone, then pairs, then in tens beyond counting. Shapes emerged from the water, not walking, not swimming, emerging, their shapes indistinct, shadows seen through thick fog, tall ones, stooped ones, all without faces, all statuesque. They stood in a circle around me in the shallow water, their presence a ring of stillness. I drew breath more slowly, not voluntarily, but commanded. I understood, without speaking, that I was not surrounded by strangers. These were the drowned, the others who had come before me, the others who had remained here in my stead, who had heeded the call of the sea. I was theirs now. A figure stood upright. It was unlike the others, its arms outstretched, its back in a grotesque curve, and where there would have been a head, there was a great black hole, a bottomless depth. From the hole, the noise accumulated, no longer a hum, but a thrum that shook the water in and out. It was the voice, the origin. My legs would not work. The water came up in a rush. The hand reached out, bone white, spindly, webbed. It crawled inches from my face, and when it brushed against my forehead, I remembered it all. Every life it had taken, every soul it had dragged down into the darkness. The blood-stained ritual centuries past, the townspeople's sacrifices in the youth, the ancient agreement between man and sea, long dead, now cut. It was not revenge it sought. It was restoration. It would come back through me. My body convulsed. My lungs took in salt. My brain exploded into fragments of something I did not possess. I sensed bones twisting within my flesh, joints relaxing, reforming. The water climbed higher, to my chest, my throat. My heart reduced speed. My eyes lost focus. But I panicked not. I embraced it. It was not death. It was transformation. When I awoke, I was once more alone on the beach, naked, dripping and gasping. I was no longer I. The wind seared my lungs. The sun, that which broke through clouds, burned my skin. My eyes beneath water told me I was no longer I. They were now bright, black, and deep, like the sea's surface at midnight. I tried to speak, but what came out of my throat was a wet rasp, not of man, not of voice. My legs ached as I stood. My hands trembled. But I possessed something living inside me, something that did not speak itself in terms but in memory. The sea was now inside me. It had filled the places I used to call despair. It had mapped me out otherwise. I've been here since. I don't leave the beach. I don't sleep. I don't eat. I wait. Walkers will pass sometimes by the shore. Tourists, nosy locals. They always stop when they see me, ankle deep in the water, frozen. They think I am a statue, or mad. They take photographs. But some of them return. A second glance. A terror that fascinates them all over again. And I'm not alone. I have watched others change, as I was changed. I have seen them answer the call. They fall, each one, helpless, attracted to something they cannot explain, into the same shadow that engulfed me. And I know what they will find. I know what they see, because I am part of it now. I don't know how long I will remain on shore. I am sliding further and further with each passing day. The ocean is calling more and more urgently. The hunger is increasing. When I shut my eyes, I see the world down in the water. Its bone cathedrals and coral, its caverns without end which teem with life not of earth. I see the drowned waiting, watching, breeding. I am the forerunner. And when the storm bursts, and burst, it will, the seas will howl, and the people who had mocked it earliest will kneel. The sea remembers not. It holds all injustice, all cruelty. It carries them on its bosom till the hour when it shall exact its pound of flesh, and I will take them with me. You think this a story, this the end, that I am a ghost, a madman. You are in error, for this night you are reading these lines, and the tide is already in ascendance. I used to believe the most frightening things in life occurred deep in the dark woods or deep within the time-forgotten houses. I used to believe that horror existed behind a disguise of darkness and echoed down in the halls of empty buildings. But I was wrong. Horror sometimes catches you in a spot you've traveled 1,000 times, a spot as ordinary and benign as a Walmart. It began on a Wednesday. I remember this detail in particular because it was my day off, and I had planned nothing other than to conduct a brief grocery mission. I drove into the Walmart around 7:15 p.m., not late, but the sun had set low enough for the sky to have the color of light bruises. The building loomed beneath that waning light like a monolith, welcoming and familiar. Inside there was nothing unusual, nothing too unusual in retrospect. The white lights overhead buzzed in that endless static tone that all Walmarts share, and the air was charged with that plastic, antiseptic scent that clung to the waxed surfaces. There were folks scattered about, but the store itself was oddly empty for the hour of the day. And yet nothing seemed off. Certainly not then. I moved slowly down the aisles, mechanically, my list on autopilot. Milk, bread, eggs, toothpaste, the essentials. My cartwheels creaked in rhythmic rhythm as I moved through the produce stand. That's where I first saw it. A man, down at the far end of the aisle. He stood completely motionless in front of the refrigerated meat, his back to me. He wasn't shopping, wasn't heading anywhere, just standing there, frozen in position. His stance was strange, stiffed. His arms hung unnaturally straight at his sides, and though I couldn't see his face, something about his form looked disfigured, as if the limbs were too long or the shoulders too pointed. First, I told myself he was just checking the price tags or maybe having dinner. But even when I walked by that aisle, I couldn't help but feel that uneasy thought that he wasn't doing either of those things. He was an object, positioned there. I pressed on, trying to drown that passing uneasiness in distraction, but it lingered behind me like perfume on the air, faint, metallic, and persistent. I saw him once more 3 aisles over. He stood by the frozen foods this time too, still standing in the same rigid stance, but now he was facing my direction. I had no clue how he'd gotten there so quickly. His face, when I finally saw it, was vacant. Not expressionless in a loose sense, but in a profound, unnerving sense. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, the whites of them too prominent. His mouth was half open, as if forever caught halfway through a word. And yet, he made no sound, no breath, no movement. His eyes did not seem to track me, yet they passed directly through me, as if I were transparent and utterly visible all at once. I turned around and left that aisle behind. My fingers ran cold on the cart metal and a chill had begun at the base of my spine. There are certain instincts which pipe up when things don't feel right. Not yell, not scream, speak. You have to shut yourself up enough inside so that you will be able to hear them. That night, I heard the whisper. It told me to go. I did not listen. I continued to shop, dashing along now, my eyes flicking down the aisles before I turned into them. I did not wish him, whatever he was. But every couple of seconds I caught sight of his figure again, either in the distance or just barely out of sight around a corner. Always standing, always watching. The air grew heavy and difficult to breathe. The cruel store lights dulled ever so slightly as if a curtain had been dropped over them. I started to feel watched, not just by him, but by the store itself. The walls seemed to close in. The aisles seemed narrower. I couldn't explain it, but everything felt a little different, as if the store's shape had changed slightly, ever so subtly curving around me. It was when I got to the electronics department that I began to feel the humming. It was quiet at first, nearly like the gentle hum of an old refrigerator. But the closer I went, the louder it became, deeper, richer. It seemed to come from nothing but vibrated inside my chest. It wasn't a noise. It was a frequency. A beat. I stopped, bewildered, and looked around. All the televisions along the wall were on, but instead of showing commercials or films, each TV showed the exact same thing, a freeze frame of the Walmart entrance timed in red digits. The doors were closed. Nobody entered. Nobody left. I walked to exit the electronics section, but he was there again. Closer. He was between the aisles, blocking the way. He had his head slightly off-center. His mouth was larger this time, abnormally larger, open in a scream that was silent, but no voice escaped. Only the hum. I left the cart and ran in the other direction. I did not care about the groceries. I just wanted to leave. But as I turned toward the checkout stands, my heart dropped. They were nowhere to be found. Not empty, vanished. The entire front of the store vanished. In place of where the registers had been, a wall stood, the same beige as the rest of the interior. No windows, no doors, no signs, as if they had never existed. I spun around and began to run, not in one direction, but just away. Away from him. Away from whatever occurred here. But now the aisles stretched out endlessly. I ran down 5, 6, but the layout no longer worked. The signs above the sections warped, flashing. The words were odd, twisted English, as though some machine had tried to replicate human words and failed. I turned and stumbled, not into an aisle, but into a dark hallway. One that didn't exist. Walmart stores don't have hallways like this. It was a narrow, extremely long one, lighted only by a single dimly flickering bulb far at the opposite end. Walls of industrial metal, cold, dripping with moisture. I should have returned, but behind him he waited. Now he was nearer than ever, no longer human in shape. His mouth fell open completely, close to his chest. Blackness seeped out of his eyes like cigarette smoke. He moved now, but in short, convulsive spasms like broken pieces of film stitched together with effort. With every movement, the air shattered. I had no choice. I darted into the hall. The hum built to a roar. The lights above flickered and died. I ran blind, led by instinct and terror. The corridor stretched out interminably, and yet I felt the walls shutting in on me. They weren't solid anymore. They pulsed like lungs, like flesh. At last I reached a door, a blank steel door with no sign. I pushed it open and stumbled in. Silence. I stood up slowly, panting, and stood in a room that was a break room, but not. There were tables, all right, chairs, lockers, but all covered in deep layers of dust. The fluorescent light overhead hummed, the flicker painting slow-motion shadows on the broken floor. There was a calendar on the wall. I moved to it, pounding heart. The date read April 2003. That couldn't be possible. I took a slow step back, and then I listened. The hum again, but now with whispers, thousands of them. Mumbling voices whispering on top of one another, forming no words, no structure, only endless, pushing sound. There was an antique CRT TV sitting in the room corner. Its screen flickered on by itself. I moved forward, hypnotized. The TV showed me, standing in the room as I was at the time, but behind me in the tape stood the man. He was inches from my neck. I spun around. Nothing. But the whispering became louder. The TV lightened and flickered, and the image began to distort. My face on the TV disintegrated into white noise. Blood flowed from the eyes of my reflection. That's when I saw the door behind the lockers, a rusty fire escape. I didn't hesitate. I tore it open and went through into a cold gust of air. I was out, behind the store. The sky was inky black, without stars. No other buildings, no cars. Just an empty parking lot that seemed to go on forever. I ran until I could see headlights in the distance. One pickup truck passed by on the highway, and with the last of my strength, I was able to stop it. The driver would not believe anything I told him, but he took me to the nearest town. I told the authorities everything. They interrogated. There was no Walmart there, at least not anymore. It had been torn down in 2004, after a nighttime security guard disappeared. His body was never found. Even now, I do not know what I wrote. It was not just a shop. It was something in between time, something in between sanity, something between life and something else. I never returned, I never will. But every now and then, on late nights when the apartment is too quiet and lights flicker just a little too long, I can feel the hum all over again. And remember, the man who had his mind broken, the aisle with no end, the door that never should have been there. And that truth I'd rather not yet remember. Not everything that was constructed for the sake of convenience was ever meant for use by people actually living. I hid away the recollection under a guise of sense over the course of years, declaring it to be a hallucination, a break from reality, even an arduous or exhaustion-generated rich dream. However many sense-maintaining excuses I constructed, though, no one succeeded in explaining what truly occurred on the night. I combed the internet forums in the deepest depths of the web, those areas where reality goes unseen in plain sight, amidst conspiracy and madness. And that's where I found something that frightened me more than any memory ever could. Others had been there, few. A handful of scattered posts, each tucked away in threads that were themselves long dead. But the stories were nearly identical. A gone Walmart, a vibration that rattled the bones, a guy with a white face who never moved like anything human. There was one entry in 2011 that really freaked me out. It was short, nigh on cryptic. They're building new ones. They look the same, but they're not. Not all of them. They're copies, shells, tests. Steer clear of it if the lights are too intense and the passage is too long. If you hear the buzzing, it's already too late. That message was taken down 2 minutes after posting, but I read it, I saw it, and the hidden message in its madness appeared to be a warning rather than a delusion. However, I tried to leave it behind. I moved cities, changed careers, steered clear of shopping at Walmart altogether. It worked for a while. I built a life of routine and normalcy, the kind of way people do after surviving something that cannot be explained. Evil, though, has a way of chasing down those who try to forget it. My vehicle had a breakdown in a small town last week while I was driving to visit my brother. No Lyft, no Uber. Just a couple of gas stations and diners that looked like they'd never seen the outside of the 1980s. The mechanic indicated it would be a few hours to fix the issue, so I figured I'll just walk around, kill some time, stretch my legs. That's when I noticed it. The store was on the edge of the town, set back behind trees, its faded blue sign hardly visible amidst dirt and vines. Walmart. There was no mention of this store on Google Maps. The residents never mentioned it. There were no cars in the parking lot. Still, the sliding door slid open as I approached them. The light inside was blindingly white, the kind that strips away shadow but not darkness. Every cell in my body screamed to turn around, but something deeper, something darker, pulled me forward. It looked normal, almost identical to every other Walmart I'd ever seen, but something was missing. Sound, no music, no cashiers, no beeping registers, no rustling carts or crying children, just silence. And then the hum began, slow, low, just like before. I didn't move. I couldn't. My arms and legs had become rigid, locked in place by fear or some other force. The lights above flickered once and then stabilized. I was chilled, not on the surface but deep in the marrow of my bones. Down the aisle I saw a figure. It wasn't moving. It was gliding smoothly and slowly, as if on strings. I recognized it immediately. The man, same stance, same handicapped movements. But this time, he was different. He stood taller. His mouth was no longer open. It had been stitched shut with black thread running across his face from cheekbone to cheekbone in an expression close to ritual in character. His eyes were different. His eyes were blacker, darkly blacker. They no longer reflected, they sucked in. And he wasn't alone either. There were others now. Figures began to emerge from behind shelves and counters, each with some bodily distortion. One had arms that dragged along the floor, another had no face whatsoever. They moved towards me slowly, as if savoring the experience. I turned and ran, but the door was gone. There was a wall instead, pulsating like a living entity under the fluorescent lights. I screamed, but the sound was muffled by the store. I don't know how I managed to get away. That's all I recall. Waking up along a ditch outside town, having trouble breathing with dried blood under my nose and scratches all over my arms. My car was fixed. The mechanic told me that I never arrived after leaving it in his garage. He assumed that I had hitched a ride and vanished, but I hadn't. They let me go. Or maybe they brought me back. For the moment, I see things. Not every time, but often enough to be certain it wasn't a product of trauma or madness. I'll be strolling down a sidewalk and notice a person gazing blankly in a store window for way too long. Or I'll walk by an alley and catch the hum again, quiet and buried in the white noise of daily living. And at late nights, as I'm settling down to sleep, I get glimpses. A curving aisles too much, signs that aren't language, faces hanging out of shadows in department stores that vanish with the blink. This world, it's been tampered with. Somewhere isn't where it used to be. Somewhere is doorway, between where we are and where we shouldn't be. Something that lurks. Something that waits. And the most terrifying thing about it isn't that these beings are there. It's that they impersonate us. They borrow our habits, our structures, our logos. So when you walk into a familiar store one day and everything seems a little off, maybe the lights are just a little too bright, or the air is just a little too still, listen closely. If you hear the hum, don't run. Pray. Because once you're inside, you might never see the way out again. I never thought of myself as vulnerable, always independent, organized, emotionally level. That kind of guy who could spend a week in the wilderness alone and blink at the quiet. And yet it was in the security of my own home, my sanctuary, that I discovered something so unorthodox, so profoundly disorienting, that I started to doubt the very nature of existence. I had only been there myself for 3 months. It was on the border of a peaceful Pennsylvania suburb, far enough to be out of the buzz of city life, but close enough that I didn't feel as though I was entirely alone. It was a pleasant property, a curving gravel driveway, a wraparound porch, and weathered oak trees that cast a shadow across the yard. It was the kind of home individuals passed by and hoped they owned. Or at least I assumed so. The previous owner had passed away. Some quiet old fellow who passed away in his sleep, my agent informed me. I had nothing. No one to call family, and therefore I bought the property for cash. I required the silence that it provided. But silence, I realized, is not always quiet. There are times when it listens. There are times when it observes. The first sign was faint. It occurred during the second week of complete confinement. My employer had approved a temporary work-from-home policy, and my groceries were delivered to me on Sundays. I did not go out too frequently, appreciating the routine I had set. Wake early, exercise, work, read, sleep. I was master of all. Or so I thought. That evening, Tuesday, while I was going to bed, the hall light flashed. A momentary sputter of the bulb and then back to normal. Not an uncommon phenomenon for an old house. I shrugged it away mentally and continued on my course. But brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I got a glimpse out of the corner of my eye. Something that cannot be explained. At first, it had appeared a smudge, a shadow at the rear of the corridor behind me. But the shape was too outlined. It was not a cloud of vapor or an illusion in dying light. It had shape, tall, thin, and appallingly still. I turned about hastily, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound, only the corridor, stretching out empty into the darkness. I did not sleep that night. The following days were spent in minor disturbances. An open cupboard which I recalled I had shut. The distant echo of the creak of footsteps upstairs when downstairs. Yet the second floor was entirely empty. I accounted for these as the building was old or perhaps exhaustion distorting my brain. But I could not escape the feeling of being watched. My home, once a refuge, had grown cold. The air was thicker somehow, as if it carried a weight it no longer did. Rooms waited silently for my return, and hours felt strangely. Minutes lingered, while hours slipped away. And I was always sensitive to eyes, never seen, but sensed, pressed upon me. It was on a quiet night that things changed. I had read to the final seconds and was climbing into bed when I heard it. A knock on the back door. Not some crazy bang, but rather some thoughtful and deliberate knocking. 3 hard raps, methodically spaced as if someone measured the time between them. I was prepared. There was no one there who should have been. The house had a fence around it, the gate was shut, and the path to the back door covered in a gravel that would have warned any burglar. And yet the knock came again. 3 times, precisely in rhythm and strength. I edged toward the door slowly, my heart racing. The outside light was off, something I had recently replaced. The yard outside the glass was dark, unseeable. I stood glued, looking, waiting for something to shift. Nothing shifted. I turned the lock, cracked the door a fraction, and peered out. Nothing. No path. No sound. I closed the door and locked it with the deadbolt. That is when I heard it this time in front of the house, 3 taps. Intentional, premeditated, and in some way closer. What occurred within the next 2 hours is inexplicable. I remained indoors, lights blazing, holding a fireplace poker as if it would do me some good. Knocking continued, alternating between windows and inner walls with nothing in back of them. Each knock grew bolder and more assertive, as if it were acclimating itself to me. I tried to call the police. My phone was without signal. The internet was down. I stared at the blinking router for answers it could not give. I convinced myself that it was a coincidence, a storm perhaps, but the sky was blue outside, quiet, still. Then things took a turn for the worse. I had stood ready in the bedroom, lamps lit, gun in hand, when I heard the unmistakable groan of the stairs collapsing. It came slowly, like whoever, or whatever, was slowly putting their weight step by slow creaking step. One at a time, each increasingly heavy. The bedroom door closed. I moved back into the corner, shallow breathing, shaking muscles in a manner unfamiliar to me. Then it ceased. The creaking ceased just outside my door. And then I heard the breathing. Not mine, not fake. Gasping, racked, sighing, regulated breaths. As though what was on the other side of the door did not breathe in an effort to live, but to leave a mark, to strike fear. I have no idea how long I just stood there listening, waiting for that door to open, but never did it. Instead, the breathing grew slower and slower, step by step, down the stairs. And then it was gone. Morning arrived abruptly. The house fell back into silence. My machines came back online. Signal good. My try at a police report was met with distrust, but they'd come and send someone by. And when they arrived, they found nothing. No brakes on the house, no kicking in signs of entry, no tracks, no hits on the cameras, except for the loss in recording, those 3 missing hours. Only static. I should have gone out then, but I didn't. Pride, perhaps, or fear of appearing insane. I convinced myself that I'd made it all up. That stress had fried my brain. I slept with lights on. I avoided mirrors. And I never opened doors at night. But the house had learned something about me that night. The house had learned how to relax me. 2 weeks later, I found something in the attic. I had gone to that place of darkness only once, previously, to put some boxes on top. But afternoons when I went, I noticed that the trapdoor remained open, ladder out. I hadn't put it back yet since entering. I climbed up gradually, my weight creaking beneath me. The attic was musty, with dust specks shining in the light fading. But over at the far end of the room, under a tattered sheet, I found a small locked chest. Irony. Old. No inscription. I pried it open with a crowbar. It was packed with photos, hundreds of them. All faded, all black and white. All of some other person standing alone in a room. Always the same room, my living room. Their faces were empty. Their eyes wide open. Their bodies stiff. Some as if screaming, but locked in a mid-breath snap. At the bottom of the chest was a final photograph. One that made me shudder. It was me, standing in my living room. The same posture. The same expression. Only, I had never been photographed like that. I had never stood in such a posture. And I had never seen that camera before. I no longer trusted the house. I slept during the night, slept during the day. I boarded up the windows, relocked the locks, covered up all the shiny objects. But for nothing. The thing, whatever it was, did not live in the walls or beneath the floorboards. It lived in the house itself. At night I could hear whispers. Not words, but deeper, softer, like words that you say underwater. The sounds would filter up from beneath the floor and coil around my brain, inviting sleep. And sometimes I woke up in different rooms, without ever knowing how I'd gotten there. The house was tricking me out, learning my rhythms, my weaknesses, notating me down like water on stone. And then, one night, it tried to get me. I had fallen asleep despite my best efforts to stay awake. I remember the instant cold, the kind that sears instead of freezing. When I woke up, I was on the living room floor. The fire had died out, the lights were turned off, and I couldn't move. Something pressed on my chest. Not a burden, but pressure. It did not crush me. It just kept me there, utterly helpless. In the corner at the far side of the room stood a figure, still, faceless. It radiated something repellent, not anger, not hatred, but hunger, something animal, something patient. It inched nearer and the walls around me actually trembled. I wished to scream, to yell, but my lungs refused to respond. My mind was breaking. Memories were slipping from me. Faces, names, entire days lost to darkness. And just when the figure was going to reach out and touch me, I noticed something in its hand. It was a camera. I don't recall what happened. I woke up the next afternoon in my bed. My heart still raced. My body ached. And on the dresser, in the room's corner, was one picture. It was new. My face, twisted in terror, frozen in the living room floor. That was the final clue. The house required me. Not as a guest, but as a memory. As a ghost, perhaps. As a photograph in an old chest in the attic. I left that evening. I didn't take anything with me. I drove recklessly, wakeful until I reached a town 3 states away. I registered at a motel and collapsed. The following day, I called a realtor and sold the house. I never returned. They informed me that the house has been sold twice since I departed. Both instances, the new owners arrive in silence. Both instances, they fade a bit further away from the world. Sometimes I ask myself if the house is collecting them in, keeping them safe like museum artifacts, but it knows. I have never uttered these words to anyone whole. I've tried to start over, to feel again like I am in charge. And sometimes, I hear it all again. 3 knocks, always the same rhythm between them. And sometimes, one in a very large while, I wake up to a new picture on my bedside table. Always of me somewhere I don't recall having been. And always, lurking in the background, the same man, closing in. The next few weeks went by like a gradual slide into insanity. I ceased having people over. I ceased answering the phone. The house and I were one, swathed in a giant hug, both of us rotting from the inside out. All mirrors were shrouded, all windows boarded up. And still nothing I could do could rid me of the feeling that I was being watched. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. One evening, when thunder rolled in the distance and rain knocked lightly against the panes, I was made aware of the noise I can only interpret as wet dragging, heavy something being dragged along the hardwood floor. I didn't budge, keeping quiet. It was in the hallway, just beyond my bedroom door. It was moving slowly in rhythm, closer. A sane mind would have insisted on sense, a hurt animal, a burst pipe, a design fault. But I had gone beyond reason. My mind was bruised and warped by weeks of psychological tension. I could sense it, the reality of it, just beyond the reach of understanding. There was something in this house, and it did not want me to miss it. Finally, the dragging ceased. I never once heard the sound pull away. It was as if the thing had made up its mind to stay there, motionless, waiting, beyond the thin wooden partition that divided us. I remained frozen in place until morning. By morning, the floorboards had long wet streaks on them. They were not footprints but trails, as if something really had been dragged across the floor. They started in the hall and ran up to my bedroom door, where they just stopped, being drawn in by the air or the wood or something even more absurd. I did not trace them back. I didn't want to know. The walls started bleeding that day. It began in the bathroom on the second floor. A red streak oozed from the rim of the mirror, spreading across the tile, thick and syrupy like blood. I went up to it with shaking hands and placed them on it. It was warm, metallic, clearly blood. I froze for hours, seeing more lines emerge. On the ceiling, the stairs, the baseboards, drawing a giant web of veins full of energy that was all hysterical. The house was sick, and it was alive. Sleep deserted me completely. I sat in the corner of my bedroom with a flashlight gripped in one hand and a kitchen knife gripped in the other. The nights dragged on forever. The downstairs grandfather clock had developed an irritating rhythm. Sometimes it skipped hours, sometimes it dragged out seconds at a snail's pace. The house seemed to writhe around me, warping the very fabric of time itself. Then the voices arrived. They did not speak in any known language, but they whispered all the same. They bled from the walls and floor, from the light bulbs and the plumbing, from the silence itself. Sometimes they wept, other times they chanted in broken, ancient syllables that felt wrong in my ears, like shards of glass scraping across my skull. And always, there was a single recurring phrase that echoed in my mind long after the whispering had stopped. We never left. I knew in some awful hellish way that this house was not just haunted, it was prison. Not mine, though. For them, whatever lived here beforehand never left. They had been eaten, overwritten, their existence infused into the house like rot in a foundation. The house held no spirits in captivity. It ate them up, and I was next. I attempted to escape. I flicked a bag over my shoulder, snatched up my keys, and sprinted towards the front door. But the locks were playing hard to get. Not even with shattering glass and attempting to wriggle loose. The instant that my body crossed the threshold, I was slammed back, kicked out of the foyer like a rag doll. My spine cracked onto the stairs, the wind knocked out of my lungs. I there, twisting, iron on my tongue, sight narrowing. The house had selected me. It was incomplete. At the end of days, I ceased speaking altogether. My own voice was strange in my throat. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't slept. I hadn't lived. I was barely holding on to life. I drifted through the corridors in a daze, a specter of a man, listening to the groans and whispers that swept up from beneath the floorboards and seeped from the vents. The house started revealing things to me, delusions perhaps, but more likely pieces of history. A figure suspended from the rafters, a woman scratching on the walls, a boy weeping behind the furnace, eyes as black as ink. They were not warnings, they were introductions. And then, one night, I saw myself. In the window's reflection, though I had covered them all, this one alone remained unobscured. I stood frozen, staying long after I had stepped away. My reflection grinned, slowly, wickedly. It raised a finger and pressed it to the glass, silently speaking, though I knew exactly what they were saying. You are ours now. That was the last thing I recall before I passed out. I woke up on the living room floor, naked and freezing. The house was quiet. No whispers, no bleeding walls, no shadows. It was like everything had stopped. But I knew better. It hadn't stopped. It had just devoured me. Now I'm here, seated and writing this, because I must have someone to know, someone to tell. If you're reading this, burn the page, burn the house, burn the earth it stands upon, because the house never forgets, it never forgives, and it never lets go. It waits, and it feeds. That morning after that last reflection, when I caught a flash of my face smiling through glass while my face still lay immobile, I woke stretched out on the living room floor. I was confused, numbed to the reality, and enveloped in silence so thick that it seemed as though the house itself were holding its breath back. I edged cautiously, my bruise-tinged arms and ribs protesting with each move. Sunlight coming through windows was filtered, pale, as if the house itself damped even the world. I stared at the sheeted windows only to have the sheets ripped off. All exposed mirrors, all reflective surfaces again. The house had removed all my barriers. Something within me snapped. I approached the front door again, grasping the knob so hard my knuckles cracked. I twisted it. Nothing. The lock held fast, as unyielding as ever. I kicked at it, pummeled the wood, screamed until my throat ripped raw. But I never expected it to open. I believe somewhere inside I knew I was no longer supposed to go out. I had become home, not as a renter, not even as a victim. Something inherited, something old. It all made sense with each passing tick of the clock. I started to realize the house not as a haunted house, but as a living being. One that consumed time, memory, identity. The longer I remained there, the more it leached out of me. I would go into rooms and remember why I entered. I would gaze at my own hands and try to recall my name. Several times I had caught sight of my image flicking toward me a half step behind, as if lagging behind, being out of synchrony with itself. Or else I was being the puppet. One night when the light fragmented into purples, I went down to the basement again. I had not been in there for weeks. But something beckoned me down now. The air was chilly, but not a cold you can register with skin. It was pressure that pierced bone, as if you're underwater in black water. The stairs groaned beneath me, one by one curving like bent ribs under their load. The basement had been altered. What was once a small, cozy storage room was now large and empty. The walls felt farther apart, the ceiling taller, and on the opposite side of the far wall I saw it. A door. I never knew that door existed before. It was old, older than the rest of the house. Rusted iron hinges and crooked wooden frame. Something ancient seeped out of its cracks, a feeling I experienced in my teeth, not my skin. It spoke to me, not in voice, but in familiarity. I recognized this door even though I had never seen it. It was mine, or at least I was its. I extended my hand to the handle. The moment my fingers brushed against the rusty metal, visions that were not my own swept through me. Glimpses of fire, screaming, walls melting like wax in hell, blood streaming across floorboards like rain down a gutter. I saw generations of others, men and women, children, priests, soldiers, strangers, all consumed by the house. It had appeared in many forms over the centuries. Various buildings, same hunger. This building was only its latest form. The door creaked open. Within was a dark hallway lit by nothing, and I could still see. The walls were black, etched with shifting symbols, symbols that pulsed with something old. And at the end of the hallway a mirror stood, a tall, broken living thing. It didn't reflect me. It gave me a glimpse of the house, but charred. A hulk, the collapsed beams, broken windows, blistered walls. And in its center, movement, moving on all fours, bark-textured skin, eyeless and infinite. It stood up, turned to the mirror and stared at me, like it had waited. It smiled. I spun around and ran. I ran from the cellar, up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. But now it did not matter. The house had revealed itself. It had revealed its character. I was no longer a visitor. I was a strand in its tapestry, a part of its weave. That night I burned it down. I soaked the walls in gas, hallways, corners, doors, all that I could manage. I struck the match with a hand that hardly seemed mine and let it fall into the oil-stained rug in the entryway. The fires flared at once, greedily enveloping the walls, licking the ceiling. I waited for screams. I waited for fighting. The house laughed. Not with noise, not even with movement. It was a feeling, a thought in my head. It greeted the fire. It had been burned previously. It would be burned again. Fire never meant anything to it. It was a leech on destruction. It was a leech on endings. I had not overcome it. I was the next chapter of its cycle. Standing there among the flames, fire licking my flesh, smoke dancing around my limbs, I grasped the truth. This had never been my tale. It had always been the house's. I awoke within the burnt-out hulk, unharmed by fire, soot adhering to my clothing like the dust of tombs. My flesh was not tainted by blisters. My lungs were filled with oxygen, unblackened by smoke. Something within me was lost, though. The house was lost, but I was its container. Now, I roam around places. Sometimes I stand in front of unknown houses for hours without understanding the reason. Sometimes there's muttering in my motel rooms, or I get dark impressions that are not mine. I know it isn't finished yet. It's within me now, waiting for a new home, waiting for you. They tell you never to go out there digging where there's been decades of silence. But there was something in the silence up there, thick and unbroken and somehow palpable, that persisted along the border of my awareness, like a splinter under the skin. I'd recently purchased a very old house on a deserted street in Pennsylvania, where the trees were too close and the neighbors too distant. It was a house that had been on the market a long time longer than any house in the neighborhood. That ought to have been my first warning sign. The house itself was oddly constructed. A slender Victorian residence, its timber frame creaked under pressure of the slightest touch. The floors creaked. The windows rattled on breezeless nights. But the attic troubled me, not because of what it had, but because of how it stubbornly declined to be viewed. It lacked a pull-down ladder, stairs, only a square cutout in the ceiling of the hall. I saw it for the first time on my second night, when I glanced up at one of the house's now familiar creaks. The square had been cut, I guessed, not by design but by mistake, as if someone had attempted to shut something off rather than open it up. That evening, in bed, I listened to soft tapping noises upstairs. Faint, metronomic, not the scurry of mice, nor the harmless groan of wood getting used to heat. Almost deliberate, like fingernails tapping on the table, but never quite in rhythm, always just a hair outbeat, almost in frustration. I attempted to brush it off. Old houses had some otherworldly parlance, but every night the sound continued. Not until week 3 did I actually get my act together and do it myself. I borrowed a foldable ladder from the corner hardware store and came back with a flashlight and dire threats. Up the stairs was awkward, the ceiling sloped, and the ladder felt shaky underfoot. I pushed on the attic door and it creaked open in protest, releasing a wisp of air that was dusty and stale and something else. Something older. Something sour and animal-like. My flashlight flickered. The air in the attic was thick, oppressing like entering the lungs of some creature that had been dead for a very long time. My beam swooped across torn-open insulation, suspended wires like veins, and taped boxes all bound up with crumbling tape spread out across years. But the one thing that caught my attention right away was the object farthest in, a little chair in the corner of the attic, back towards the center of the attic, too tidy, too thoughtfully positioned, and beside it, a recorder, not a new one. This was an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind that they used years and years earlier. Dust had covered everything else in the attic, but not the tape recorder. Its reels were dry and it hummed quietly, like it was siphoning electricity out of nothing. I lifted it up. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, my flashlight went out. I was thrown into darkness at once, dense and sensory. My heart was stopped dead, racing. And then, something changed. It wasn't the sort of movement you get around a corner. It was close, breath close. The sort of close that takes away sound and goes directly to instinct. I stepped back, legs shaking, and went down the ladder less elegantly than I would care to remember. I left the attic door open that evening. I did not sleep. It only got worse in the days that followed. It began with odors, brief, nauseating odors of rotting that appeared out of nowhere. Then the cold. I woke up one morning and found my own breath in the air even after the thermostat had been set at 75. And then the sounds. Not just the tapping anymore. Whispers. They did not arrive until early morning dawn hours when sleep had me in its grip, but awareness would not let me go. I could not distinguish words, only the rhythm of them, the nauseating feeling of them. They were not talking to me. They were talking about me, and I knew in my bones that whatever they were, they did not like having me around. On the 5th night after the night in the attic, I discovered something on my hallway floor, a strip of magnetic tape. Stiff and yellowed, it was heavy with the scent of mildew. I gazed at it for what seemed like forever before shoving it into the trash. I locked my bedroom door that night, not for safety, but because I was so desperate to draw a line to myself. This is mine, and you can't come in. It didn't matter. I woke up holding it, the tape, twisted and knotted and covered in something dark and sticky. I washed my hands until they were bloody. Sleep abandoned me altogether. My body grew weak, worn down by terror and fatigue. Shadows lingered too long. Lights blinked even when they had not been touched. I avoided the 2nd floor. I could not walk by the attic without a headache building behind my eyes and a heave of nausea tightening my gut. And the dream, or vision, or maybe not my own memory. I sat in the attic, that same chair, but I was frozen. My hands were tied. The reel-to-reel was recording, but playing back instead. Hushed whispers of apology, crying, and that sharp crack when something broke. Not timber. Bone. Something stood over me. I never once saw its face, but its presence was unacceptable. Tall and angular, faces of darkness that seemed to churn like living oil. I awoke screaming, my body covered in sweat, certain that the beast had followed me. That morning, I resolved to go back to the attic once more. Daylight was bravado. I ascended the ladder, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. This time, I did not linger. I tore open the boxes, box by box. They were filled with garbage, old books, clothes, shattered photographs, but one contained something wrapped in plastic and string, a journal. It was soggy at the edges, almost illegible in some places, but what I could read made my blood run cold more convincingly than any other ghost story ever written down. It was possessed by a Raymond Clark. The writing had been paranoid, hysterical. He ranted about voices, about the tape recorder speaking to him in secret messages, about something on the 3rd floor that would not leave him alone, that fed on loneliness and memory. The last entry, in massive, trembling letters, stated only, "It wears my face now. Do not listen. Burn the tape. Do not record." I released the journal. I no longer required explanations. Whatever infested this place was not something to be pitied and examined. It was not something that was left behind from a life previously lived. Something was alive, and it had consumed me. I hired a demolition team the following day and had the attic sealed for good. Not knocked down, sealed. Reinforced steel and concrete, like going off to battle. But before they came the night before, I made one final foolishness. I played the recorder. I don't know what drove me. Curiosity, pride, thirst for closure. The machine materialized in a clang of metal, the reels whirling furiously but not with tape. What came out of it wasn't sound, it was presence. The room grew darker, not physically but perceptually. Time moved at a crawl, and my voice, my own voice, began to speak out of the machine. It showed me everything I had ever done, every thought, every fear. But it showed it to them in the past tense, as if I were already dead. I destroyed the recorder into pieces, but it continued talking. The voice continued on until I pulled the plug out of the wall. Even so, a little bit longer for a few seconds, it continued whispering through the pieces. That night, I departed my house, never to return. The workers arrived. They sealed the attic. The new owner, I have heard, occupies only the ground floor. He says that the house is serene, but every now and again, When it blows just a particular way, the neighbors tell me that they can hear something from the top of the house, something tapping, and sometimes whispering, but always above them, never around, never within reach, only observing, waiting. Despite all, I returned a year later. I convinced myself that it was for closure, to see if the house was still locked, to make my mind think that the nightmares were just reminders of a terrible chapter closed. I knew better, however. Something had taken root in me, not just in my mind, but in my heart. A thread, so thin and yet impossible to sever, pulled my brain back to that attic night after night. I stood across the street and studied the slumped form of the house. The owner had not kept up the house. Once white, if so, with age now peeled away like wrinkles and curled and faded back behind from all these winters like scabby old hides. I waited. I did not know anything, but I needed to know. I reached the house at the boundary of twilight, iron and wet leaves smelling heavy in the air. The key still functioned. The door groaned open on obstinate hinges. I entered. Dust and mildew hung in the air, but the structure stood, as if time had moved still within its walls. And there it was. A chair. That old wooden chair. Today in the middle of the living room, no longer trapped in the attic. Against the wall. Alone. A shiver ran down my spine, so cold it left me immobile. I should have turned around, shut the door once more, and never glanced back. But I crept forward slowly, every step resonating with rebellion. On the chair was a new reel-to-reel tape recorder, a flawless copy of the one before me. Wires hung from it like black veins, tracing out onto the hardwood floor. Its reels were motionless, dust-free, silent. I just gazed at it for what seemed like hours. And then, out of nowhere, it booted up. The reels whirled brutally, the machine growling like a muffled snarl. My voice came back, but with friends. It had overtones to it, as if there were dozens of copies of me, dark-and-end, frayed, speaking the same phrases millisecond apart. It was not a tape. It was a performance. It proclaimed I never went away. It proclaimed I never arrived. That everything that I had recalled, sprinting out of the door, securing up the attic, packing up and getting out of town, had been an inserted memory that had been given to me. A diversion. That it told me that the actual me was still huddled in that attic, taped to the chair, whispering secrets into an infinite loop of ruined tape. It told me that it was all just a dream I had created to keep myself alive. The real word quicker, the boards of the floor it rested on breaking apart and tearing, as if something was bursting forth from the ground. And the voice. Not human. Not mine. Something old world. Cold. Drone. It threatened not. Screamed not. Prepared, as if uttering some eternal truth. You can't leave where you never were. You weren't away. You broke. I retreated, trembling, my eyesight fading, all of my limbs frozen. The walls constricted, curved, ripping outward like wet paper to show a darker shadow beyond them. The air was immobile. Time leaked away. And then, I saw myself, in the chair, eyes wide open, face pale, slowly opening mouth, repeating something over and over. There was a roll of tape on the floor next to me, bloodied. I screamed, but nothing came out. I spun around to run and was confronted with still more walls, more hallways, more doors, all of them crooked, twisted, infinite. There was no exit, because there never had been. That's where the memory stopped, if it was a memory, or maybe just another performance performed by another man's playing. I've left playing as I know it behind. I have only what I feel, what I sense even now, here recording this. Yes, I said recording. I'm no longer inside that house, nor least of all, at least body-wise, but I bear it with me, around me, inside me. I listen to the reels clicking at midnight, though I own no such thing. I notice blackness seeping on the periphery of my vision that disappears when I turn to look, and every now and then, down way at the bottom of sleep, I stir and find myself sitting up straight as one can, staring at a wall, to listen. Awaits the next tape to start. I have moved. burned the old house to the ground. I've attempted therapy, spiritual cleansing, even exorcism. Nothing helped. Whatever was in that attic, it was never just in that house. It was invited. It was opened. And I was its key. Now I write down whatever comes to mind. Every whisper, every fluttering of another mind. Because if I don't write it down, it happens in another's voice, in dreams, in mirrors, in silence. I offer this not as a warning, because warnings presume you have a choice. No, I offer this as a confession. Because if you are listening to this now, or reading these words, then something inside of you has already opened the door. Perhaps you never even noticed. Perhaps it was small. A thought, a question, a shadow. Or perhaps a creak in the floorboard in the attic you intentionally avoided. But now you do know, and knowing is where it begins.